start recording right now, unfortunately a little late. And then when we get to the question and answer section, I will stop that again so we can ask questions without worrying about the recording.
Cool. Awesome.
Right, sorry.
No, don't worry. So support groups are huge for substance use disorder. And the gamut really varies. There's group therapy, there's something called SMART recovery, there's 12-step recovery, refuge recovery, there's a group called Dharma Punks, there's other sobriety groups that are a little bit more driven by a singular purpose, or a singular person, I should say. Laura McCowan has a group called the Luckiest Club. There's a group by Tommy Rosen called Recovery 2.0, but all a way to get people involved in supporting one another in their recovery. And for eating disorders, I don't know, it doesn't seem as robust. Usually there's the trifecta, the therapist, the dietitian, the physician, and it's that one-on-one client to professional dynamic, and support groups are a little bit tougher to get clients to engage in. I know in my own private practice, it's like pulling teeth to try and get somebody to commit to doing some sort of support group. Maybe they're doing it in IOP, but then in outpatient, once they step down and it's one-on-one with a dietitian, it's a bit harder to get them to engage, whether that's meal support or just a general process group or a body image group. It's tougher. So, I want to say right off the top that this is going to be a very mini talk on 12-step and how it was born for the use of addictions and has morphed into being a program for those struggling with food. And I want to say high level again that we could do even individual mini presentations on like 12-step for binge eating disorder, 12-step for bulimia, 12-step for anorexia. I'm just going to do a broad overview of the different 12-step programs that are out there and just kind of a pro-con of weaving 12-step into someone's outpatient treatment plan. So I just want to say that right off the top. So what is 12-step recovery? I know most of us don't have our cameras on, which is cool, but maybe do a virtual raise hand if you've ever heard of a 12-step program. Get a little, thanks, Teresa, Jacqueline, Kelsey. Awesome. Okay. So a small group of us have. So I love this quote. It comes from it was a research article. I forget what journal is published in, but the idea is here. So 12-step philosophy refers to a particular view of the recovery process, emphasizes the importance of accepting addiction as a disease that can be arrested but never eliminated, enhancing individual maturity and spiritual growth, minimizing self-centeredness, and providing help to others who are addicted. And so basically, a 12-step kind of program was really started by Bill Wilson for AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a method of bringing people together in a peer support way to recover, to stop drinking alcohol and to reach sobriety. This is a really interesting article from 2020. This was, I believe he was a psychiatrist at Stanford, and found there's high quality evidence that AA and 12-step facilitated interventions are more effective than other established treatments such as CBT for increasing abstinence. It's a really fascinating article because 12-step programs are traditionally anonymous. It is hard. We don't have a lot of research on them and how they can support people in their recovery process. So this was an article review. I think it sampled over 10,000 people. So pretty profound that this was this physician's takeaway, who, by the way, in the article I was reading about him, was like, I used to think AA was like quackery, right? And then when he dug into the evidence, it was like, wow, this really, there's something to this. And it's hard to, again, quantify it, right? Because it's not capturing people necessarily if there's relapse and if they're coming back or not. So 12-step programs, AA was the first one from AA for drugs of abuse. There's been many, many programs born: Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous. I mean, it's now also expanded into behavioral issues. There's GA, Gamblers Anonymous. It really has run the gamut. There's Al-Anon, which is a 12-step program for individuals who are in relationship with alcoholics. So it has really covered different areas, challenging areas for folks. And a bit of history. So AA was started in 1935 by a dude named Bill Wilson. He was a New York stockbroker and had a really hard time getting sober. And he found that his desire to drink lessened when he helped other alcoholics. And this guy could literally not get sober after going to hospitals and physicians, and then somehow got connected with another alcoholic, and the two of them together talking about their shared problem, they were able to stay sober, and it mushroomed into them helping others. The book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is often referred to as the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, was published in 1939, and it really outlines the program of recovery. From this book, many 12-step fellowships have either kept the Big Book of AA and used that as their primary text, or they've adapted the book to cover the issue that 12-step program is focusing on. To be a member of AA, it's free, and each meeting is autonomous, meaning there's nobody there's no head of AA that's disseminating information. Every single AA meeting group is autonomous to themselves. They make up their own rules, their own guidelines, and they follow the principles that have been set forth in the Big Book of AA. And this is a quote from AA's website. AA 12 steps are a set of spiritual principles. When practiced as a way of life, they can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to recover from alcoholism. AA is pretty cool. Like, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. That's it. Doesn't mean that you have to stay stopped. Doesn't mean that if you take a drink, you're out, right? Like, just the desire to stop is enough to be included in the meeting. And the primary purpose of AA is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. So here are the 12 steps. I'm not going to read them all. But you'll notice in some of the language, there's the word God is used, a power greater than ourselves. There's masculine words like God as we understood him. It can be pretty freaking off-putting for folks, right? You see God and him and you're like, ooh, is this a religious cult? And the truth of the matter is, it is not. It is a spiritual path. They will say in AA meetings or in literature to choose a God of your own understanding. People might refer to God as great outdoors, good orderly direction. Group of drunks is colloquially used in AA meetings. And really the purpose of each step and somebody moving through them is to admit their powerlessness over their alcoholism, and then as they move through the steps, then help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. So it's really about passing it on. This is a Buddhist version of the 12 steps that I find to be a little bit more palatable. So step 1, admitting we are powerless over craving and addiction and our lives are unmanageable, believing in a power greater than ourselves, and then choosing to seek refuge in that power greater than us. And so when thinking about this for eating disorders and our eating disorder clients, it's like, man, my clients and even myself, before I entered recovery, I was so self-reliant. I thought I knew best. I thought that, like, there's no way my therapist could help me. How could she understand, blah, blah, blah. And if we can wrap our minds around bringing this kind of spiritual practice to our clients, if they're open to it, then perhaps they can tap into something greater than themselves to help them with those what's the word I'm looking for? Obsessive thoughts, compulsions, things that they feel like, quote, nothing will help. It's just another possible intervention for them. And so, of course, there are 12-step programs for eating now. There might be more, but I think these are the three majors. There's EDA, Eating Disorder Anonymous, not as well known. There's FAA, Food Addicts Anonymous, which is a hot button for us as dietitians. And then there's Overeaters Anonymous, famously known as OA. So just a little kind of high level of each of them. EDA was founded in 2000 by sober members of AA. The only requirement for EDA is a desire to recover from an eating disorder. And for the EDA kind of principles, layout, recovery in this group's eyes means living without obsessing on food, weight, and body image. EDA is really about seeking more balance. And I took this from their website because, I mean, it's so similar to what I share with clients, right? Eat when hungry, stop when moderately full. Recovery is about feelings, not food. Get basic needs met first. If hungry, eat. If angry, find a safe outlet. If lonely, reach out. And then some other suggestions like going to meetings. Get open with others, right? That is so hard for our clients with eating disorders, to share with others what's really going on with them, to be honest and to kind of get out of that shame bubble. Develop willingness to look at things differently. Recovery is rigid. I mean, my gosh, especially for clients who are a bit more over-controlled, maybe diagnosed with anorexia, it can be really, really hard to be open to other ideas. But so going back, so we have EDA, which is kind of more, let's seek balance. Let's not obsess about food. We want to live life that's outside of just thinking about food and bodies. And then we have the other two. We have Overeaters Anonymous and Food Addicts Anonymous. So OA started in 1958. For them, recovery means abstinence from overeating, whatever that means to the individual. So something that I hear a lot of times from my clients who are sober and who work a 12-step program like AA or NA are like, this is really clear. I'm either drinking or I'm not. I'm using drugs or I'm not. But when it comes to food, we can't be so black and white. We have to eat 3 to 5 times a day, every single day. And it's really nebulous. It's not, right? Like what overeating might mean for one client is going to be different from another client, which might be different from what we determine to be a kind of marker for binging or whatnot. So it's a little more vague, and that can have some cons towards it. OA is using the 12 steps, which are adapted from AA, the 12 traditions, and this program of 9 tools. And I didn't write all 9 here, but I just put out tool number 1 is a plan of eating to prevent overeating. And you might be wondering, okay, who's giving them this plan? Which is a potential problem, right? Like usually the plan of eating, quote unquote, is given to the individual by their sponsor. And their sponsor is not a dietitian. Their sponsor is not a physician. It's just what has worked for the sponsor. So that's OA. Then we have Food Addicts Anonymous, which was born out of OA. It was born from a woman who found that OA was way too vague. She needed more clear understanding of what abstinence meant. For FAA, the only membership requirement is a desire to stop eating addictively. Again, kind of a vague statement, but FAA gets even more drilled down. Abstinence is equivalent to quote unquote AA sobriety and is defined as weighed and measured meals with nothing in between, no flour, no sugar, and the avoidance of any individual binge foods. So people that are seeking recovery in FAA are following this type of plan. So I'm just gonna like pause for a minute, everyone take a sip of water, because that might be causing some of us to have our hair stand up. Again, this is a high level, just overview. So could these 12-step programs help our clients? Well, here are some of the pros. So all 12-step programs, regardless of whether it's for food, for alcohol, for drugs, there's CODA, Codependence Anonymous, they're free, they're donation-based. There's a suggested donation to put $1 or $2 in the basket, but otherwise they're fully self-supporting. And so that's a super accessible way to get somebody to engage with others, right? I have some clients who are paying to see me, paying to see their therapist, paying to see their psychiatrist. And then I mentioned going to a body image group and they're like, no way, like I'm not paying for that, right? So this is free. It promotes intimacy with others. The whole point of a 12-step program is that when someone gets recovery, they then, quote, give it away by sponsoring somebody else and helping them find recovery. Promotes humility. It's all about sharing kind of things that you really don't want to share with anybody else, that you share with a safe person, and trust and see that like no one's abandoning you. Encourages introspection in the steps. Going back, step 4 is writing an inventory of just resentments in your life and sharing them with someone else. It's just designed to deflate the ego. And, eating disorders are egocentric, and some of our clients are like, what do you mean that it's bad to only eat salads for every single meal? Like, that's eating healthy. It's like, okay, but you're not eating protein and your hair might be falling out, right? Like, so 12 steps work against self-sufficiency, weaves in spirituality. They're independent of treatment centers, which for some folks who have been to treatment center after treatment center, it's like they get a little suspicious, right? And they don't want anything to do with that type of system. As I said, they're self-supporting, and 12-step programs are structured. So for especially a over-controlled individual who likes to like be perfectionistic and follow rules and a plan, if they're working through these steps, they have clear actions that they're taking to engage in their recovery. What are the cons? So depending on the program, it promotes rigidity, right? I mean, Food Addicts Anonymous, no sugar, no flour, 3 weighed and measured meals, like, whoa, that's not necessarily something that we're always like. I know for most of my clients, it's about not being rigid, right? So that can be a con. Another con is people's sponsors, depending on the program, could be acting as a dietitian, right? Someone who's I once had a client give me her food plan that her sponsor gave her. And when I asked her if her sponsor was a dietitian, she was like, oh no, she's a realtor. I'm like, okay, so like, are you open to us tweaking this meal plan a bit? And she was, but I have had clients in the past who were like, no. And so that can even bring up its own rigidity in and of itself. These programs are peer support programs, so no one's in charge. There's no oversight from professionals. And that means depending on the type of group, there can be an unhealthy group dynamic. I've had clients who have gone to OA and have picked up new fun tips and tricks to support their eating disorder, right? And so is that necessarily something that's wrong with a 12-step program? Maybe, maybe not. It also could be an indication that that client was just way too early in her recovery to go to a room like that. So I want to just talk about 3 clinical pearls, vignettes of how 12 steps can be weaved in as an adjunct to treatment. So this is one client, 25-year-old female with a diagnosis of anorexia, restricting type. She's had a history of 2 treatment stays. Most recently was discharged from her last day in 2022. She's 2.5 years sober from alcohol and a super active member in AA. She sees her therapist 1 to 2 times per week. She's sponsored in AA and EDA and meets with me weekly for process sessions and meal support. She still struggles a lot with body image and often complains that, quote, nothing works. And this is a client who, for the most part, is sticking to her meal plan. She's completing her meals during meal support. She's really engaged in her recovery. But some of the traditional tools for body image, she's either doesn't believe in or doesn't want to practice or just doesn't even really want to go there and in talking about body image. And a few weekends ago, she texted me, she was going to a Taylor Swift concert and texted me that she was super uncomfortable in her body and felt like she couldn't even be in the moment. And because I am versed in the 12 steps, because I know that she's really, it helps her a lot. We brought up step 3 in that text exchange of like, hey, could you turn this over to your higher power? Now, you might be sitting there like, what the F does that mean? What is Syndey talking about? And so I just want to say that, like, if you're not really familiar with the 12 steps, like, I don't expect clinicians to have that sort of language to share with a client. But even if you are briefly familiar after this talk and maybe had a client that was open to a little bit of like woo-woo spirituality stuff, maybe like I'll tell I have clients sometimes buy a box and they call it their witch box or universe box or spirit box, or for some people they like the word God and they'll call it their God box. And when those body image disturbances or the fear of eating whatever it is comes up and feels so overwhelming, they'll write it on a piece of paper, put it in the box, and just trust that something bigger than them is going to work on it. Now, there's got to be a lot of buy-in there, right? And so I find that this is really only helpful with clients who have engaged in a 12-step program for alcohol or drugs. But so for this client, like we weaved in a little bit of 12-step in this way. Here's a client where 12-step eating program did not work at all. So 35-year-old female client with a diagnosis of bulimia, history of 3 treatment stays, and has worked with numerous RDs. She's been sober for 2 years, and she also is active in AA, sees her therapist once a week, has an AA sponsor, and meets with me bi-weekly. She's had patterns of being behavior-free for like 6 months and then lapsing. And her main triggers for the binging and purging include PMDD and a recent new diagnosis of endometriosis. And this client, a 1.5 years ago, unbeknownst to me, told me that she was going to OA meetings because she thought maybe it would help with her binging. When she got there, she felt it was way too rigid. She felt like it was another diet. She felt really bad about herself when she wasn't able to be quote unquote abstinent. And, you know, this was a scenario where she was open to the possibility that maybe just because AA worked for her, that another 12-step program for food wasn't also going to work for her. And we were really able to identify that, like, hey, you know, there's other medical stuff that is initiating these triggers. And in fact, like, OA is not an appropriate place for you. So just being able to have that open conversation with a client. Then the last pearl is a 33-year-old female, no formal eating disorder diagnosis, but she's self-diagnosed as a binge eater. Sorry for my dog. client was binging almost daily for 1 year prior to working together. And her binging was pretty extreme. It, involved ordering takeout from multiple restaurants at once and eating to the point where she was passing out in bed. She's significant trauma history and history of dieting and weight cycling. This is a client who has gained and lost 50 pounds, has done every type of diet under the sun. And when she was starting at the age of 6, her mom would put her on the scale and weigh her every day. So in her early 20s, she had tried OA and found it to be quote unquote like another diet. She had a hard time abstaining from foods. She wasn't even really sure what her binge foods were. She felt that everyone was just trying to lose weight there and found it to be a really not helpful experience. 6 months into working together, she went back to OA by her own choice. She's a lot of friends who are in AA and NA and likes the language of that the 12 steps can bring to an individual. She also was brought up pretty religious and so likes this idea of seeking something bigger than herself. So she decided to go back to OA. And honestly, I was a little like, I don't know if you should go, given her history. But she wanted to do it. And so she finally now has a sponsor after trying 3 different people. And this is a client who is very well educated. She's very open with me. She doesn't have trouble like speaking up for herself. And so she was very clear with her sponsor. I have a dietitian, my dietitian, and I work on my meal plan. I don't want your meal plan. I don't want to be reporting certain foods to you. I don't want to be quote unquote abstinent from any foods. I want to work the steps and hopefully get rid of this obsession that I have around food in general. And so her sponsor was open to that. And it has really been extremely helpful for her. She's feeling relief. She's feeling connection. She feels trust in something bigger than herself. And I think most importantly for this client is she attends the same meeting weekly, is meeting friends in that meeting. They have a shared language. And in between sessions, between me and her therapist, she has fellows that she can call and talk about this stuff. And she knows they understand. So in summary, 12-step programs are an accessible adjunct to traditional treatment, right? They're free. There's no really barrier to entry. You could sign online to a meeting tonight and check it out. It presents a new way of relating to one's eating disorder, possibly if they're open to it. However, the abstinence model may not translate from substance use disorder to eating disorder. Again, food is not black and white. And for some folks, it might be helpful to abstain from certain things. And I think we have to be really open and curious as clinicians when a client is telling us that they need to abstain from a food. 12-step programs promote connection, which is huge. I mean, there's a saying, the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that goes for eating disorders as well, right? Like when there's 2 people who share the same struggle, talking with one another and kind of cheering each other on, it can be very supportive as opposed to coming in, meeting with me, and I'm cheering them on, right? But I'm not sharing in the same struggle currently that they are. And also 12-step programs are structured and they're programs of action and they're skill-based in a way. We don't have enough time to really go into each and every step, and they are kind of vague and nebulous just looking at it right now, but each step is promoting an individual to either get honest with another person, to make amends for harms caused, to meditate, right? Like there are concrete actions that can be taken. So I feel like I talked very fast and shared a lot of information. But questions, thoughts, feelings?
I'm gonna jump in here real quick and stop